The chill on the balcony was a welcome shock against Brielle's skin. Below, the manicured gardens of the Tokyo hotel were bathed in the cold, perfect light of a full moon. Inside, the grand ballroom hummed with the sound of 1,000 meaningless conversations, the clinking of champagne flutes, and a string quartet playing something that was probably expensive. She clutched the silk of her dark green dress, a borrowed armor that felt more like a cage. She was an art history student, more comfortable in dusty libraries than in a room shimmering with diamonds and deceit. There you are. Brielle didn't have to turn. The voice, sharp and coated in condescending sweetness, belonged to her sister. Vanessa emerged from the ballroom, a slash of crimson silk against the night, her husband, Marcus, trailing behind her like a well-trained dog. Hiding again, little sister? Vanessa's smile was a weapon. You can't just disappear. People will think you have no manners. I just needed some air, Brielle murmured, keeping her gaze fixed on the distant Shinjuku skyline. Vanessa let out a brittle laugh. The air in there is worth millions a breath. You should be inside networking. Marcus is about to close a deal with the Minister of Finance. She gestured vaguely back toward the glittering room. But you wouldn't know anything about that, would you? Too busy with your useless paintings and old books. Brielle's jaw tightened. She had come to Japan for a prestigious summer internship at the Niza Museum, a dream she had worked years to achieve. Vanessa and her CEO husband, who were in Tokyo for business, had insisted she attend this gala. It was, in Vanessa's words, a chance for Brielle to see how the real world works. I'm fine out here, Brielle said, her voice flat. Vanessa stepped closer, her perfume cloying and aggressive. She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial hiss. Look at you, sulking in the corner. Do you know how pathetic this looks? I bring you to the most exclusive event of the season, and you hide like a child. You're 21, Brielle. Act like it. She scanned the balcony, then looked back at her sister with undisguised pity. You wander around this party like a ghost. Nobody is looking at you. Nobody wants you here. The words landed like stones, each one a familiar weight she had carried since childhood. She was the quiet one, the academic one, the one who didn't fit into Vanessa's gleaming, polished world. That's not true, Brielle whispered, but the protest was weak, even to her own ears. Isn't it? Vanessa's perfectly painted lips curled. Go on. Prove me wrong. As if summoned by the challenge, a subtle shift occurred in the ballroom behind them. The hum of conversation faltered. A space began to clear near the entrance, a ripple of deference spreading through the crowd. Brielle turned, drawn by the sudden change in atmosphere. And she saw him. He was not the loudest man in the room, nor the most adorned. But he moved like the floor was his, and the air parted for him out of respect. He wore a simple, brutally well-tailored black suit, the kind that costs more than a car. His presence was an anchor in the glittering chaos, a point of absolute stillness. Brielle's gaze was caught by the stark white of his shirt cuffs and the intricate, dark lines of a tattoo peeking from beneath the fabric at his collar and wrist. It was a dragon scale, she thought, rendered in exquisite detail. He was speaking to a shorter, older man, his expression unreadable. Then, another man approached their small group, larger and louder than the others, his suit just a little too shiny. He bowed, but it was an insulting, perfunctory gesture. He said something Brielle couldn't hear, his smile wide and false. That's when she made the mistake of looking down. The shiny-suited man dropped something as he turned away. It wasn't an accident. The movement was too deliberate, too smooth. A small, lacquered wooden charm, no bigger than a thumb, fell silently onto the plush carpet near the tattooed man's feet. It was carved in the shape of a white chrysanthemum. A funeral flower. No one else seemed to notice. The music swelled again, the conversations resumed. But Brielle had seen it. Her art history training had sharpened her eye for detail, for things that were out of place. This was profoundly out of place. The man in the black suit did not look down. His eyes, dark and intelligent, lifted from his companion and swept the room. It was a predator's gaze, assessing every shadow, every reflection. And then it stopped. On her. He held her stare from across the ballroom. There was no warmth in it, no curiosity. It was pure, cold calculation. He knew she had seen. The air on the balcony suddenly felt thin, the chill seeping into her bones. Vanessa, oblivious, was still talking. See? Nothing. You're invisible. But she wasn't invisible. Not anymore. The most dangerous man in the room was looking right at her. He said a single, quiet word to the man beside him. Two others, who had been standing like statues near the wall, detached themselves and began moving through the crowd. They weren't walking toward the man who dropped the charm. They were walking toward the balcony. Toward her. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her. She took a step back, her hand gripping the cold stone balustrade. I have to go, she said, turning to leave. But the man himself was already moving. He crossed the ballroom with an unhurried, inexorable grace that was more menacing than any sprint. The crowd parted for him, as if by instinct. He ignored cabinet ministers and tech billionaires, his focus singular. He stopped in front of her. Up close, he was even more imposing. The scent of sandalwood and something clean, like cypress, clung to him. There was a faint, silvery scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the only imperfection on a face that was otherwise carved from stone. You saw, he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was a low baritone, smooth and devoid of accent. Brielle's heart hammered against her ribs. She could feel Vanessa's shocked silence beside her. The two men in suits now flanked the entrance to the balcony, cutting off her escape. She swallowed, her throat dry. I don't know what you're talking about. His eyes narrowed slightly. The man from the Nishida clan. The charm he dropped. Describe it. His directness was disarming. Lying felt like a fool's errand. It was wood, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Black lacquer. Carved like a white chrysanthemum. A flicker of something, not surprise, but confirmation, passed through his eyes. He gave a nearly imperceptible nod. The world seemed to shrink to the space between them. The party, her sister, her entire life before this moment. It all faded into a distant hum. Vanessa finally found her voice. Excuse me, do you know who we are? This is a private conversation. The man did not even glance at her. His attention remained fixed on Brielle. He extended a hand, not to her, but in a gesture that dismissed her sister entirely. Then he looked at Brielle, and for the first time, his expression softened, just a fraction. It was a carefully constructed look, she realized, designed to reassure, to control. You're with me now, he said, the words an unbreakable command. His hand came to rest on the small of her back. His touch was light, yet it was a brand, a claim. He guided her forward, away from her stunned sister, away from the balcony, and into the heart of the glittering, dangerous room. As he led her through the parting crowd, she heard Vanessa's strangled cry behind her, a sound of fury and disbelief. Brielle didn't look back. She was no longer invisible. She was his. The ride through Tokyo was silent. Brielle sat on the plush leather of the back seat, as far from him as she could get. The car, a black Toyota Century, was silent and smooth, gliding through the neon-drenched streets like a shark through water. He sat beside her, a study in stillness, looking out the window as if she weren't there. But she felt his presence like a physical weight, a pressure in the air. She was a witness, a liability. She knew the sterile, polite term for what she was, a loose end. They arrived at a residential skyscraper in Shinjuku that scraped the clouds. The private elevator opened directly into a penthouse apartment that was less a home and more a statement. It was a vast space of glass, steel, and dark wood, furnished with minimalist precision. There were no photographs, no clutter, no sign of a life lived, only of a life controlled. A wall of glass offered a breathtaking, godlike view of the city below. My name is Takahashi Ryota, he said, finally breaking the silence. He stood by the window, his silhouette stark against the glittering expanse. The man you saw tonight is an enemy. The charm was a death threat. Because you saw it, they will assume you are with me. They will assume you are a weakness to be exploited. I'm not with you, Brielle said, her voice shaking slightly. She hated the tremor, the sign of fear. You are now, he replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. They will not believe you are an innocent bystander. In my world, there is no such thing. For your own protection, you will stay here. It was a prison then, a beautiful, luxurious cage high above the world. Days bled into one another. She was given clothes, food, anything she asked for except her freedom. Ryota was a ghost in his own home. He would be gone for hours, sometimes days, leaving her in the silent, watchful company of his housekeeper and the guards posted discreetly in the hall. One afternoon, driven by a desperate boredom, she explored. She found a study, a room she knew was forbidden. Unlike the rest of the apartment, it felt lived in. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes on history, strategy, and economics. On the corner of a large, uncluttered desk sat a single, small silver frame. Brielle picked it up. The photograph was of a young Japanese woman with a gentle, unguarded smile and eyes that crinkled at the corners. She wore a simple summer dress and stood in a field of flowers. She looked soft and kind and utterly out of place in this cold, hard world. Her name was Akari. Brielle spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Ryota stood in the doorway, his suit jacket off, his sleeves rolled up to reveal the dense, intricate tapestry of his tattoos. He wasn't angry. His face was a mask of something far more devastating, a deep, hollowed-out grief. He walked to the desk and took the frame from her hands, his fingers brushing hers. His touch was warm. She was my fiancée, he said, his voice low and rough. He stared at the photograph, his gaze turned inward. She was caught in the crossfire during a territory dispute. A mistake. A debt I have yet to repay. He looked at Brielle, and his eyes were dark with a shame so profound it seemed to pull all the light from the room. I failed to protect her. I will not make that mistake again. That was the moment she understood. Her presence here wasn't just about protecting a witness. It was about his own ghost, his own failure. He was protecting himself from repeating the past. The next day, the threat became terrifyingly real. One of his men brought her the phone she'd left at the hotel. There was a new message from an unknown number. It was a photograph of her on the balcony at the gala, taken from a distance. A red circle was drawn around her face. Below it, a simple message in English. We know who you have. Ryota saw the message over her shoulder. His jaw clenched, a muscle twitching in his cheek. He left the room without a word. An hour later, he returned. He placed a passport and a plane ticket on the table in front of her. This is a one-way ticket to Buenos Aires, he said, his voice clipped and professional. The passport has a new name. There is a bank account with enough money to start over. I can have you on a private jet in an hour. They will not find you. It was an out. A chance to run, to disappear, to go back to being invisible. She could take it. She could leave this world of violence and shadows behind forever. She thought of her sister's cruel words on the balcony. Nobody wants you. She thought of her life back home, a quiet, orderly existence that suddenly felt pale and empty. Then she looked at the phone, at the red circle around her face. They wouldn't stop looking for her. They would see her as a loose end Ryota had let go. She pushed the ticket back across the table. They'll find me, she said, her voice steady. She met his gaze, holding it. Or, they'll spend the rest of my life trying. My only chance of survival is with you. It was the first time she had chosen to be here. The first time she had claimed a place in this dangerous world. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly suppressed. He studied her for a long moment, his eyes searching hers for a hint of a lie, of fear. He found none. He nodded slowly. So be it. Later that night, the tension between them shifted. A minor skirmish in Roppongi had left a shallow, clean cut across the back of his hand. He was in the vast living room, dabbing at it clumsily with a piece of cotton and antiseptic. Brielle walked over, her bare feet silent on the polished floor. You'll make it worse like that, she said softly. He looked up, surprised by her proximity. Let me, she said, holding out her hand. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before handing her the supplies. She sat on the arm of the sofa, her knee almost touching his. She took his hand in hers. His skin was warm, his hand calloused and strong. She cleaned the wound with a gentle, practiced efficiency, her focus absolute. The scent of antiseptic mingled with the sandalwood of his cologne. The only sound was the distant hum of the city. He wasn't looking at his hand. He was watching her face, his expression intense, unreadable. The air between them grew thick, charged with an unspoken current. It was the closest they had been. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, see the faint scar above his eye, the dark sweep of his lashes. She finished and placed a small bandage over the cut. Her fingers lingered on his skin for a heartbeat too long. Brielle, he said. He said her name differently than anyone else ever had. It wasn't a summons or a statement. It was a discovery. A low, quiet sound that seemed to acknowledge the very core of her. She finally looked up, and her breath caught in her throat. The cold, calculated mask of the Mafia boss was gone. In its place was something raw, something vulnerable, something that looked at her as if she were the only solid thing in a collapsing world. The attack came, without warning. They were in the car, moving through the glittering, high-end shopping district of Ginza, when a black sedan slammed into their side. The world became a violent screech of metal and shattering glass. Brielle was thrown against the door, her head striking the window. Before the car had even stopped spinning, the street erupted in gunfire. Ryota moved with a speed that was inhuman. He threw his body over hers, shielding her from the spray of glass, his weight a solid, reassuring pressure. Stay down, he commanded, his voice a low growl in her ear. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and burning rubber. He pushed a small, heavy pistol into her hand. Do not use it unless they open this door. The violence outside was a brutal symphony of chaos. Ryota's driver and bodyguard were returning fire. Then, her door was ripped open. A man with a scarred face and dead eyes reached in for her. Brielle screamed, a raw, primal sound. She saw the cold, round barrel of his gun pointing at her temple. Time seemed to slow, to stretch. She saw Ryota's face, a mask of pure, unrestrained fury mixed with something she had never seen there before, stark, undiluted fear. He thought he was losing her. He was losing Akari all over again. With a roar, Ryota moved, a blur of lethal precision. He neutralized the man in a series of swift, brutal movements. He pulled Brielle from the car, his grip on her arm almost painful, and shoved her behind the vehicle's engine block. The battle was short, savage, and decisive. When the silence fell, it was more deafening than the gunfire. They abandoned the wrecked car and were bundled into a backup vehicle that appeared out of a side street. They drove to a nondescript warehouse in the industrial district near the bay, a safe house. Inside, one of the attackers, the driver of the other car, was tied to a chair. He was alive, battered, but alive. Ryota's men prepared for an interrogation. The air was cold, thick with the promise of pain. The captured man looked at Brielle, his lips split and bleeding. He spat on the concrete floor near her feet. Is this the whore you're going to die for, Takahashi? He sneered in heavily accented English. Something inside Brielle, a wire stretched taut for days, finally snapped. The memory of the gun barrel against her skin, the terror in Ryota's eyes, it coalesced into a cold, hard rage. Her old self, the quiet art student, receded. On a nearby workbench, she saw a heavy steel wrench. She picked it up. The weight was solid, real. She walked towards the man on the chair. Ryota's men tensed, ready to intervene. Ryota simply watched her, his expression unreadable. She stopped in front of the captive, her shadow falling over him. The man who opened my door, she said, her voice chillingly calm. The one with the scar on his face. He got away, it was a lie. She had seen him go down. He ran down the alley behind the department store. I saw him get into a blue car. I can identify him. I can identify the car. She leaned in closer, the wrench held loosely in her hand. But you can give me his name right now. And maybe the boss will be lenient. It was a perfect, calculated bluff. She used a specific detail, the alley, to make it sound credible. The man's bravado crumbled. Fear flashed in his eyes. He believed her. He broke, babbling a name, a location, spilling every secret he had. Brielle stepped back, placing the wrench carefully back on the table. She had not laid a hand on him, but she had broken him nonetheless. She had crossed a line. She had used deceit and intimidation as weapons, and she had been good at it. She looked at Ryota. He was staring at her, not with shock, but with a dawning, intense respect. He had seen a darkness in her that mirrored his own. Later, the adrenaline faded, leaving her shaking. She stood on a rusty catwalk outside the warehouse, breathing in the salty, polluted air. The night was cold. Ryota came and stood beside her, a silent presence in the dark. He didn't offer comfort or platitudes. You should have been afraid, he said, his voice quiet. She turned to look at him, his profile a sharp silhouette against the distant city lights. I was, she admitted, her voice steady. But I was more afraid of you getting hurt because of me. It wasn't a confession of love. It was something deeper, more dangerous. A confession of allegiance. A statement that his survival had become as important as her own. The silence between them stretched, filled with the weight of her words. Having you here, he finally said, his voice rough with an emotion he could not hide, is a complication I did not plan for. He turned to face her fully, his eyes catching the dim light. But it is one I will not give up. The information from the captured man led them to a traitor high within Ryota's own organization. Before he was dealt with, the traitor played his last, spiteful card. He contacted Vanessa. He told her that her sister, Brielle, had been kidnapped by the notorious head of the Takahashigumi Yakuza. He framed it as a desperate cry for help. Vanessa, seeing not a family crisis, but a spectacular story with herself at the center, went to the police. Then she went to the media. Overnight, Brielle's face was everywhere. She was the innocent American student, the tragic victim. She was no longer just a target for a rival clan. She was a public spectacle, the centerpiece of an international incident. The cage had just gotten infinitely larger. The media storm was a wildfire. Brielle's face, a smiling university photo Vanessa had supplied, was plastered across every news channel and website. She was the damsel in distress, the innocent girl swallowed by the Tokyo underworld. It was the perfect cover for the Nishida-gumi's final move. They used the public chaos as a smokescreen, leaking the location of a supposed peace talk to both Ryota and the Tokyo Metropolitan Police. Their plan was simple: trap Ryota between his enemies and the law, using the kidnapped American girl as the bait. Ryota's men brought him the details of the proposed meeting. It was to take place at the old Asakura House, a historic building preserved in the heart of Shibuya, an island of tradition amidst a sea of modernity. It's a trap, Ryota said, his voice flat. His lieutenants agreed. To walk in there was suicide. Brielle, who had been studying the architectural plans of the building on a tablet, looked up. They're right. It is. But they've made a mistake. All eyes in the room turned to her. She pointed to a section of the floor plan. This building was moved and reconstructed here in the early 20th century. But it was originally part of a larger estate. The plans show a walled-off passage here, in the foundation. It was a service tunnel connecting to a separate kitchen house that was torn down. I bet nobody knows it's still there. Her art history knowledge, the thing her sister had called useless, had just become their most valuable weapon. She looked directly at Ryota. They expect you to come through the front door like a target, or the back door like a coward. They won't be watching the ground beneath their feet. She stood, her decision made. I'm going with you. A murmur went through the room. One of his men started to protest, but Ryota silenced him with a look. He studied Brielle, seeing not a victim but a strategist. A partner. Get her a weapon, he ordered. Dressed in black, Brielle moved with them through the damp, narrow service tunnel. The air was cold and smelled of earth and stone. She was terrified, but a strange calm had settled over her. This was her choice. She was not being rescued from this fight. She was walking into it. They emerged into a small storage room in the building's cellar, exactly as the plans had indicated. Above, they could hear the muffled sounds of men taking their positions. Ryota's team moved with silent, deadly efficiency, taking control of the house from the inside out. The trap was reversed. The final confrontation happened in the main hall. The head of the Nishida clan, a wiry, vicious man named Kenji, realized he had been outmaneuvered. In a last, desperate act, he grabbed Brielle, pulling her in front of him as a shield and pressing a knife to her throat. "Drop your weapons, Takahashi," Kenji screamed, his eyes wild with hate. "Or she dies. You trade your life for hers." Ryota's men froze. Ryota himself stood across the room, his face a mask of cold fury. Brielle could feel the sharp edge of the blade against her skin, Kenji's harsh breathing in her ear. She saw Ryota's hand tighten on his gun. He was considering it. For her, he was actually considering a trade he would never make for anyone else. He was about to sacrifice his empire for her. In that instant, she knew what she had to do. She had a small, thin blade hidden in the sleeve of her jacket, one Ryota's man had given her. With a sudden, fluid motion, she drove the knife backward into Kenji's thigh. He roared in pain and surprise, his grip loosening for a single, crucial second. It was all Ryota needed. A single, precise shot echoed in the hall. Kenji crumpled to the floor. It was over. In the ringing silence that followed, surrounded by the wreckage of the fight, Ryota crossed the room to her. He didn't shout, he didn't celebrate. He came to her, his eyes only for her. His hands gently framed her face, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones as he checked her for any injury. The cold control was gone, replaced by a raw, undeniable relief. He looked down at the knife still clutched in her hand, then back to her face. "Akari died because I was not strong enough to protect her," he said, his voice low and thick with emotion, meant only for her. "Tonight, you saved me." He pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. "You are not a weakness, Brielle. You are my strength." The cost of that strength was her old life. It was utterly and irrevocably gone. The international incident, her sister's public betrayal, the violence she had not only witnessed but participated in. There was no going back. Vanessa would never forgive her for stealing the spotlight, and the world would never see her as a simple art student again. She had chosen this world, and it had branded her as its own. Ryota, too, had paid a price. He had revealed a vulnerability, a crack in his armor named Brielle. In the intricate power dynamics of his world, this made him both more dangerous and more of a target. Days later, they stood on the penthouse balcony, the city lights of Tokyo sprawling beneath them like a carpet of fallen stars. The news channels had moved on to other stories. Vanessa had returned to America in a cloud of manufactured drama. The silence was a bomb. Ryota stood behind her, not touching, but she could feel his presence, a solid, grounding warmth at her back. She was no longer a prisoner in this beautiful cage. She was its keeper. She didn't look back at him. She looked out at the endless, glittering metropolis that had nearly consumed her. It was a city of ghosts and honor, of violence and beauty, a world she had never imagined for herself. But as she breathed in the cool night air, it no longer felt foreign. It no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a kingdom, and she was no longer a visitor. She was home.